WWE fans were treated to one of the most intense verbal confrontations on Monday Night Raw, as Oba Femi and Bron Breakker finally came face-to-face with the tension between them reaching a boiling point. This was not simply another exchange of words between two rising stars. Both men have been building their reputations as major players, and each believes he has a legitimate claim to being one of WWE's next defining stars. What made the segment so memorable was how little Femi needed to do to make his point. There was no wild outburst and no attempt to overpower Breakker through sheer aggression. Instead, Femi remained composed and confident while allowing his words to do the work. Breakker entered the confrontation with the attitude of someone determined to prove that he belonged at the very top of WWE. He wanted answers, but the response he received was probably not what he expected. From the moment the two stood across from each other, it was obvious that neither man intended to back down. The shadow of SummerSlam. The background to this rivalry is important because Oba Femi has recently reached a major milestone in his WWE career. Coming out of SummerSlam, Femi had enormous momentum behind him after defeating Brock Lesnar in a highly anticipated showdown. The victory immediately changed the way many fans viewed him. Beating an established superstar of Lesnar's stature gave Femi credibility that cannot simply be created through promotional material. It made people wonder whether WWE was preparing him for an even bigger role. Femi suddenly looked less like a promising newcomer and more like someone ready to stand among the company's biggest names. That success also created an interesting contrast with Bron Breakker. Breakker is no stranger to being presented as a future cornerstone of WWE himself. He has already established a reputation for his intensity, athleticism, and powerful presence. So while Femi was receiving enormous attention following SummerSlam, Breakker had every reason to feel that his own position was being challenged. That contrast has made their rivalry feel less like a random matchup and more like a battle over who deserves to be considered the next major face of the company. Bron Breakker demands an answer. When Breakker stepped into the ring, his frustration was impossible to miss. He was not interested in vague statements or another week of watching the situation develop. He wanted to know who WWE fans should consider the future of the company. It was a simple question on the surface, but the meaning behind it was much bigger. Breakker clearly believed that his own accomplishments had already earned him consideration. He has spent months establishing himself as one of the most physically imposing young stars on the roster, and he expected that reputation to carry weight. Instead, his challenge opened the door for an answer that put him in an uncomfortable position. Rather than immediately giving Breakker the confrontation he wanted, Paul Heyman appeared and shifted the entire tone of the segment. Heyman has always been one of the most effective figures in WWE when it comes to creating uncertainty with a few carefully chosen words. Instead of giving Breakker the validation he was looking for, Heyman essentially turned the question back toward him. Suddenly, Breakker was no longer controlling the conversation. He was waiting to discover where everyone else stood. Heyman changes the atmosphere. The arrival of Paul Heyman instantly changed the energy inside the arena. Breakker had walked into the ring expecting to make a statement, but Heyman made it clear that there was another layer to the situation. His presence suggested that the confrontation was bigger than one superstar trying to prove a point. Heyman has a long history of recognizing potential and positioning himself around people he believes can become major stars. That made his involvement especially interesting because of his complicated history with Breakker. The tension became even stronger when Heyman refused to give Breakker the straightforward answer he wanted. Instead, he allowed the uncertainty to grow until Oba Femi finally made his entrance. By that point, the audience was already waiting for the inevitable face-to-face encounter. Femi entered without appearing rushed or intimidated. His calm approach stood in sharp contrast to Breakker's frustration. It created the impression that Femi believed the situation was already settled in his mind. He did not need to convince himself that he belonged in the conversation. He simply acted like he already knew it. The match is made official. Just when it seemed the confrontation might turn physical, Heyman stepped in and changed the direction of the entire segment. Rather than allowing the two competitors to settle their differences in an uncontrolled confrontation, the announcement was made that their match had already been set. That decision immediately changed the stakes. Breakker could no longer simply demand that Femi prove himself on the spot. There was now an official contest waiting for them, giving both men an opportunity to settle the argument under competitive circumstances. The announcement also removed some of the uncertainty surrounding their rivalry. Instead of wondering whether WWE would eventually book the two stars against each other, fans suddenly had a match to anticipate. For Breakker, however, the timing could not have been more frustrating. He had entered the ring hoping to control the conversation, only to discover that the bigger decision had already been made without him. Femi, meanwhile, appeared perfectly comfortable with the situation. That difference in attitude could become one of the defining elements of their feud. The handshake sends another message. Then came one of the most interesting visual moments of the entire segment. Heyman shook Breakker's hand before turning toward Femi and extending the same gesture. Femi accepted. On its own, a handshake might seem insignificant, but in professional wrestling, context can make a simple gesture speak volumes. Heyman's history with Breakker made the moment especially noticeable. Seeing him acknowledge Femi in the same manner suggested that Heyman was willing to recognize Femi as someone worthy of serious attention. It also left Breakker standing between two people who appeared far more comfortable with the situation than he was. Whether this becomes something bigger remains to be seen, but the visual was certainly enough to create questions about where Heyman's loyalties and interests truly lie. It also added another psychological layer to the rivalry. Breakker is not simply trying to defeat Femi in the ring anymore. He may also feel that he is fighting to reclaim the position he believes should have been his all along, more than just a match. That is what makes this rivalry potentially bigger than a single contest. Both men are young, powerful, ambitious, and determined to establish themselves as major WWE stars. Femi has momentum coming out of a huge victory, while Breakker has already built a reputation as one of the most dangerous competitors of his generation. Their personalities also complement the feud perfectly. Breakker brings intensity and emotion, while Femi brings patience and confidence. That contrast gives WWE plenty of material to work with as the story develops. The next time they stand across from each other, the conversation may be very different because there will be no microphone separating them from the result they both want. One of them will have an opportunity to prove his argument in the ring. The other will have to deal with the consequences, the road ahead. Ultimately, the biggest question is no longer simply who is the future of WWE. The real question is which man can back up his confidence when the pressure is at its highest. Oba Femi has already shown that he can handle a major spotlight, while Bron Breakker has repeatedly demonstrated that he thrives when the intensity rises. Their upcoming match therefore has the potential to become an important chapter in the development of both careers. The Raw confrontation succeeded because neither competitor needed to physically dominate the other to make an impact. Femi won the verbal exchange with confidence, Breakker showed just how much the situation matters to him, and Heyman added another layer of uncertainty. Now the talking can only take them so far. Eventually, the bell will ring, and the debate over who belongs at the top will have to be settled inside the ring. That is when the real answer begins.